I love being in the water. My mom always has said that I swam before I walked. And I always remember love being in pools. I would be in pools and I would be all pickled. Most athletes will tell you that they gravitate toward a certain sport or sports because it comes naturally and it feels good. If it doesn't come naturally and it doesn't feel good, you're not going to do it. And you're certainly not going to excel if you are doing it. The first part was discovering that I just had something. It was, that X factor, secret sauce, or whatever you wanted to call it, that a lot of the other kids that I was swimming with didn't have. And that's a real magical moment in a kid's life when they realize that, okay, I'm maybe good at something. Where can I take this? What's the next steps? I was able to pursue my career in that way, which is like, hey, I want to break the national age group record for 12-year-olds, 11 and 12-year-olds. And I did it. And it just goes from there.
Hi, I'm Chris Waddell. Welcome to Living It, the podcast where we join experts in the experience of being human. Be bold. Say yes to adventure. Say yes to living it. Welcome to Chris Waddell Living It, where we talk with experts in the experience of being human, people who have taken the risk to live their dreams and live fully. Today, we're talking with John Moffet, who is a two-time U.S. Olympian swimmer, former world record holder. He's also a three-time Emmy Award-winning television producer. But some of these are the things that you get introduced with all the time. In doing my research, I love that you were an NCAA Top 6 award, which meant honoring the top 6 most outstanding student athletes in America. He's also a husband, a father, host of the Sports Life Balance podcast, where they talk about pivotal moments in their careers and how athletes shaped and how athletics shaped and transformed their lives. John, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Chris. I'm really happy to be here.
This is amazing. And really, ultimately, I want to get to how athletics shaped your life, and because I look at it, and your two Olympic games were at 16 and at 20 years old. I mean, you were a man in many senses, but not necessarily. But looking at that introduction, I get introduced all the time as well. And sometimes are there parts of that introduction that you look at and go, that's the most important part?
I don't think I do. That's an interesting question. I guess looking back, I like that there's a life's work there and that there's something to show for the life's work. And you also have to remember, I just grew up as a regular kid without notions of being able to do big things. It kind of just didn't even occur to me. And then I discovered at a young age, at 11 years old, that I was really good at something. And then a coach told me, hey, you know what? You can be really good. And then he told my parents, and my parents said, the coach says you could be really good. And that was like transformative to me. And it all kind of springboards from that and that pivotal experience when I was a kid growing up.
When you were 11 years old. So what was that moment like? Because you were 11 years old, you're a lump of clay in a lot of ways as an 11-year-old, but you happen to be really good at something. What did that do? Did a light bulb go on for you? Like, hey, I'm different than my peers. Hey, this could be something that is a change in my life, like something different than what my parents had experienced. What goes through the mind of an 11-year-old when you recognize that, hey, you're a bit of a prodigy?
Well, I didn't realize that. It's only significant in hindsight, looking back, because that's kind of my origin story. But the light bulb that went off the first one was that I love being in the water. My mom always has said that I swam before I walked. And I always remember love being in pools. I would be in pools and I would be all pickled and, miserable and cold, but I love the water. And so the first light bulb is maybe I love the water because I've got an affinity for this sport. And that there's adults that are telling me that. So that's the first light bulb. The second light bulb where I kind of started thinking that I was a little different happened later, when I started developing the skills and realized that I had an aptitude for learning and becoming fast as a swimmer that those around me didn't necessarily have. And so, yeah, that was the second light bulb, was discovering that I am in fact fast, and let's see where I can take it. That's the next step.
How did fast happen? One, you said you had the affinity for being in the water. Did that mean that you worked harder at it than your peers, or was there some sort of physical affinity as well?
It was definitely started as a physical affinity. It was just you know, most athletes will tell you that they gravitate toward a certain sport or sports because it comes naturally and it feels good. If it doesn't come naturally and it doesn't feel good, you're not going to do it, and you're certainly not going to excel if you are doing it. So the first part was discovering that I just had something. It was, that X factor, secret sauce, or whatever you wanted to call it, that a lot of the other kids that I was swimming with didn't have. The second component, though, was the fact that I thought to myself, where can I take this? And that's a real magical moment in a kid's life when they realize that, okay, I'm maybe good at something. Where can I take this? What's the next steps? And I was able to pursue my career in that way, which is like, hey, I want to break the national age group record for 12-year-olds, 11 and 12-year-olds. And I did it. And it just goes from there.
Was there a bit of reality based on the club, your swimming club, that were there other people who had broken national records, or people who went to the national trials, went to the Olympic trials, to the games? Did you see any of that to make it a reality, or was it kind of a reality that was just personal?
It was, well, on my first swim club, it was called Mount Baldy Aquatics. And no, there wasn't anyone of that level. However, in Southern California, there were really, really good swimmers, like people who were my age that ended up becoming legends, multiple world record holders, world champions, multi NC2A champions. They were there. They were right there. And I was blessed that I started swimming early on with a lot of those people around, and you knew who they were. Because you can just see it, you can feel it. And some of these people, like Jeff Kostoff, Sippy Woodhead, Steve Barnacote, Jesse Basayo, Mark Goodell, Brian Goodell. Some of these people are, world record holders, gold medalists. And before long, I got fast enough where I was in lanes next to them, or at the very least on the deck with them, or in the locker rooms with them. And you realize that they're just humans, and they're just trying to kick your butt, and you're trying to kick their butt.
So the veneer was removed early on. It wasn't, these are gods. It was, these are humans. And did you recognize that pretty early on? Like, take that sort of, take the air out of the balloon kind of thing?
I never tire of meeting someone who was at one point in my life that stranger who's a hero or heroine. And you get to meet them. And one of the first ones really was like Bruce Furness, who won 2 gold medals in the 76 Olympics. I was on the swim team with him in 1978, 79, 80. We were training together. And it's like, what on earth did I do? A little kind of normal kid from Claremont, California. How on earth am I training with these people? And how on earth do I have this crazy notion to try to be like them? I don't know where it came from.
It happened in such a short, compressed time, because you're talking about him in 76, but then you made the team in 1980, and
Yeah.
you have a July birthday. So you had just turned 16. Like, did
16
you have your driver's permit? Did you have your driver's license?
I didn't have my driver's license. No. No, I had to. I turned 16, and it was like the trials happened within a week after that. I think if I'd have to go look at a calendar, but no, we after after the 1980 Olympic team was selected based upon those trials in Irvine, California. We then went to China for 3 weeks, and so I remember like being really excited to come back because I would be able to take my driving test once came back. So it was literally, I remember I was exhausted and jet lagged, but it was literally the first thing that I did the first morning that I could after I returned. Got my license, I passed, and yeah, it was a another rite of passage.
Now, was there any conversation in that car when you were doing your driving test that, hey, what else do you do? Well, I just made the Olympic team and I just came back from 3 weeks of swimming in China. Was there any conversation with that, or were you just an ordinary 16-year-old and keeping your head down?
No, no conversations about that. In fact, it comes up, but it's not something that I wear on my sleeve. Like this morning, I met a woman who went to Tokyo and she had the Olympic rings on her ankle. And so I don't have any of those types of things. And I love when I am able to, and this might be a coping mechanism from the years when I was transitioning out of an athlete, but I love to be able to prove myself on my own merits outside of what I once did when I was a young adult and teenager. So I try. I've worked many different places. I've worked where people don't find out for a long time, and that's the way I like it. That's kind of just always my mo. It's just recently that I've become more involved within the Olympic and Paralympic movement that it's become less that way. I've kind of, you know, I turned my back on the Olympics and all that I did in swimming. I think because that was my way of just dealing with it. That okay, you got to move on, embrace the suck, and figure it out on your own merits now, not on your merits based upon who you once were.
So it's an interesting thing, right? Because you go to school and you do sports, both of which are foundational in your education, right? Your preparation for whatever you're going to do next. I think in looking at the introduction for you, to me, being in the NCAA top six, the top six student athletes in the country, that to me was the one that jumped out in terms of you earned it. But how did you look at swimming in terms of the scope of your whole life? Because it was a different time too, right? Where you weren't going to be a swimmer through 40 years old.
No, those opportunities didn't exist. In fact, you couldn't make any money, or you couldn't even compete within, for Team USA. I mean, if it was found out that somebody paid you under the table for speaking, for example, you're done. That was it. That was it. And so it was a very different era. It's one of the reasons that you look back 40 plus years, and most swimmers hung it up by the time they graduated from college because there weren't opportunities. The college for swimming and many other sports, as you know, that's the breeding ground for, the next generation of world-class athletes in the United States. Now, thankfully, and rightly so, there's opportunities for those athletes to continue competing because they're being supported. But that didn't exist. And I certainly didn't, I didn't have family money or something that would allow me to do that.
Right. And so what's the emphasis as a swimmer? Because you also won two NCAA titles after your second Olympic Games. As a team, you won two NCAA titles in 85 and 86,
Yeah,
right?
I won three individuals, I think.
Right. No, I was talking about the team. But swimming's one of those weird, I mean, swimming, skiing are weird sports in college, they are team sports that are individual sports.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And so where's the emphasis as a, because one, I mean, we didn't even talk about 1980. You made the team, but then that's when it was boycotted.
Right, correct.
And so
Yes.
you didn't go to Moscow. And so you missed out on the first team. And then your second, and so that was in between your sophomore and junior year of high school that you would have gone to
Yeah.
1980, right?
Yeah.
And then in between your sophomore and junior year of college was the games in LA. What's the context? Are the Olympics the pinnacle for swimmers? Is NCAA swimming? How do you sort of sift that out within your mind as an athlete?
Look, the Olympics are for swimmers. That's where you become somebody other than just a really good swimmer that you have to retire eventually and put it behind you. So if you are blessed enough to win a gold medal, it's life transforming for good or bad.
Right.
Winning an NC2A title, it was awesome. Winning with all those guys on the team and all of our collective struggles and our amazing chemistry that led us to be able to win those NC2A titles. That's also life transforming, but it's not on a public stage. So 84 was gutting for me. It was terrible. The injury that, I had to do rehab on the injury for quite a while. I didn't even get back into the pool until I think right before, if I remember correctly, right before Halloween was when I started getting back in the water. I just needed to heal the leg. But what kept me from just like saying, just hanging it up, because there's a part of me that just was like, I can't take this, was those guys, was the fact that we could win an NC2A title together. That's what kept me going. And I had 2 more years to contribute. I signed on for 4 years. So yeah, it was, that's what kept me going, was the opportunities ahead.
Which is a big deal. I mean, you talk about keeping going, because swimming is a major commitment. This
Yeah.
is, you're talking about a race that is plus or minus 100 meters, plus or minus, a minute, right? So your world record, when you broke the world record, was 1:02:13 for the
Yeah.
100
Yeah.
meter breast.
Yeah. It sounds right.
Yeah, so broke the world record. You broke the world record, broke the world record, which had been held by an American teammate.
Well, Steve Lundquist, he was in the lane next to me when I did it. So yeah.
Yeah, and he had broken it 4 or 5 times prior to you breaking it.
Oh, he was the greatest of the era. I mean, he was dominant.
So you were talking about gold medals as being transformative, right? That it is the rest of your life potentially. You're approaching the finals as the world record holder. In the prelims, you just went 3/100ths of a second over your existing world record. You beat the previous world record holder, who was your teammate. So looking at it, you look at that and go, okay, this is the moment. And in swimming, you guys put in so much work for that moment, to hope that your shave and your taper and everything all meets at the right time. And it looks like it's all going, but then you get hurt and think you might not even be able to compete. What's the thought process with regard to the gold medal, with regard to competing? I mean, you probably had enough time to kind of think about things, I would imagine, or tried not to, maybe.
Well, let's I did say that winning a gold medal is transformative, and it is. But for me, and I believe for the big lesson that comes out of this, is what's transformative is trying to win the gold medal. That's transformative in the big scope of things for your life.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, somebody winning a gold medal, it will fade. There will be somebody who's coming right behind you and is going to be winning that gold medal and is younger and, et cetera, et cetera. It's just the way of the world. But what doesn't go away is the fact that what you said is that, yes, I was focused 100%, especially in light of the 1980 disappointment of not being able to go because of the US-led boycott. I was 100% laser focused on 84 and that day and that moment. Um, it was surreal, because I'd never felt better. I'd never trained better. As you said, I broke Steve Lundquist's world record at the trials beforehand going into the games. I was never in better shape in my entire life. And everything was looking really dang good. I mean, it was very exciting. And then that prelim swim, the muscle went. It's called the adductor magnus. It's basically your inner thigh, and it just tore. It just gave.
Which is a huge deal for a breaststroker.
Yeah, because you use that muscle a lot.
Right.
A lot. I mean, that's like it's a dominant muscle in the breaststroke kick. It's and so yeah, and I'd never had any sort of injury like that before. So it came out of the blue. It was with about probably 40 meters to go. And injuries are strange when they happen. Obviously you got a fair amount of adrenaline when you're competing at the games.
10,000 people in the stands.
Yeah. And you the adrenaline gets you through it, that initial, but believe me, it hit me like a baseball bat, and it really hurt. But it, like, as you probably know, injuries, when they first happen, you're kind of, they don't hurt. Once the inflammation and all of that settles in and the bruising begins, that's when it hurts. So it was that final that night that I was only able to do because the doctors had numbed me up. They injected me with xylocaine, and my leg was a noodle. And needless to say, it's very difficult to swim breaststroke when your leg's a noodle. But it numbed me to the point where I could go through the motions. And I knew that I had to, everything was caving in around me. My chances of the gold medal were completely dashed within an hour or two after the injury. I knew that I couldn't do it. So I had to deal with that. My next thing that I dealt with, I remember consciously thinking about this, is that I don't want to regret this. So I decided, and the doctors filled me in, that, look, you're going to completely re-injure this muscle. You're going to make the tear worse by doing this. And I said, I don't care. I got to do it. So that's why I got numbed up, because I couldn't kick breaststroke at all in the warm up. And I remember very clearly, it was just a bizarre day. There were 15,000 people in the stands, and my parents, you got to remember, back then, my parents and my grandparents, you don't get to talk to them. There's no such thing as cell phones. They just saw my prelim swim. They didn't even know that something happened. So I come out, and I come out onto the deck because I couldn't warm up. They obviously knew something was wrong when I couldn't warm up. And I'm all wrapped up, and my leg is numb. And I remember very clearly, Carrie Steinsteifer and Nancy Hogshead had just won the gold medal. They tied for gold in the 100 freestyle. And that just happened. And there was a window of opportunity where I could get into the diving well, the same diving well where Greg Louganis and, was legendary diving in 1984. And I was the only one out on deck, other than a smattering of officials and et cetera. And I remember feeling every one of those 15,000 pairs of eyes on me. And I tried to kick breaststroke, and I was able to kind of fake my way through it. I don't even know how many laps I did. Couldn't have warmed up for more than like 2 or 3 minutes. And then got out, and within 15 minutes or so, I was in the finals.
It's amazing just to think of the 15,000 people. Did they energize you? I mean, because you're talking about the adrenaline that you had in finishing the prelims. Was there an adrenaline part of those 15,000 people, or was it more of a reality part of, there are 15,000 people here, and this is the moment I want to be at my best, and I'm not at my best?
No, it was energizing for the prelims and soaking it all in. It was the polar opposite for those finals. I was beyond horrified. I was just in shock. I couldn't believe it was happening. So it made it worse knowing that I was being watched by a lot of people
without necessarily having the explanation of what had happened or any of that stuff. Coming to the realization, I mean, you have a really mature approach to it, or opinion about what happened, that it's not about the gold medal, it's about trying to win the gold medal. Did that
Yeah.
happen in the moment, or is that a product of a lot of therapy afterwards? How did this work?
It's definitely hindsight and growing up. When it happened, it was indescribably crushing. I was gutted. I was completely gutted. And so, no, you don't have perspective. First of all, I was 20 years old, and I'd been working for years toward this moment, and it was awful. And I had to be there for the rest of the competition. It was painful. So no. It was definitely through years of just kind of like, just dealing with, okay, well, bad things happen, and something bad happened. And now, John, you need to move ahead. And, that's a lesson that we all learn, that when failure happens, okay, you can, pout for the weekend, but then you really need to start thinking about, okay, what am I going to do to get myself out of this hole? What did I learn? And how do I rebound from this? And being really smart about it, trying to be really, really smart about it. But, emotions, like failure is incredibly painful, especially for athletes. It's just, it's a disaster. And so, yeah, I think it took me years to realize that it's interesting. If I would have won the gold medal, would I have said that? Would I say that my life was transformed by all the hard work that it took to get there, rather than the gold medal? I mean, I don't know. It's an interesting question, and I'll never know the answer.
It's the hypothetical right now, right? Would I have if this had happened? But you don't know, because it didn't happen. But that's the I mean, from the outside, I feel like looking at you and knowing you, and that you probably would have come to that same realization, but it might have been an entirely different path to do it, to achieve, to arrive there. Was there a benefit in still being a student and still being an athlete too? Because if you were just a professional athlete, and you could well have done that. I mean, you could well have, if you were in modern times, if it were now, and you were as good as you were at 16 years old, you might not have been training with a college team. You might have been a professional effectively after graduating from high school.
Well, to answer the first question, yes, so those guys around me, my coach, and the support, and the absolute 100%, backing of them. They wanted me to heal because we were all so close, but we also wanted to win. So of course that definitely helped. As far as the hypothetical what if, I don't know the answer to that, but I will tell you that, living on through the years and getting older, that you do realize that sometimes hitting that bottom is exactly what rebounds you into becoming something that you wouldn't have possibly been. So I often say, or my wife will say that if I won the gold medal, we probably would have never been married. Well, I don't know, but my life would have been a lot different. And maybe we wouldn't be. So, and I'm super happy with my life. I'm kind of a happy dude. It's weird to say, but man, I have been blessed, and so much of it seems to have stemmed from that day that coach pulled me aside and said, you're good. You could be good at this. And that's the magical thing that I like to especially tell kids. that you never know who around you will be the next president. You never know who around you will become an author or a politician. And the most important fact is that when you're looking around and wondering, oh, that kid's really smart, he will, come up with the cure for cancer. Well, don't forget to look at yourself too, because no matter what you think of your 11-year-old self, that can change in a blink.
And the difficulties often are what define us, right? Often are the source of the resilience that allows us to, one, have big dreams moving forward, and two, to be able to struggle through those big dreams. What's the thought process? Because it's so interesting to look at what we see now. We see professional athletes, we see endorsements, we see people effectively getting rich from the Olympics, and it's not everybody, obviously. It's a small percentage,
Very, very small percentage.
but those are the people that we see that much more of on television. So it has a disproportionate weight in some ways in terms of our perception of the games. But you knew that effectively college was the end or close to the end of your swimming career, regardless of how it was going to go, regardless of a gold medal or not. And what was did you have a greater emphasis on your studies, on what you were going to do? It was like, because the plan of sports was not this sort of infinite, it could be 2 years, it could be 20 years. It's like, no, it's pretty finite.
Yeah, good question.
So did you have that plan of, yes, this is what I'm doing, but it's almost still extracurricular, even though you're at the very top of your sport?
Yeah, it was moment. Like, all right, let's start making the new John here, because the reality of what I thought John could do. It's weird talking in third person about myself. It's dumb. It's weird. It was, once I realized that I wasn't going to be Olympic gold medal dude, that I was like, okay, now you got to figure out something else. And thankfully, I was, I re-emphasized school, um, without de-emphasizing swimming. But I think really, really poured my heart and soul into school, which is something I wasn't necessarily doing when I was training for 84. It took all my energy. Not all my energy, but yes, definitely transformative after the fact.
And you were a design major. What's a design major?
Well, it's early on. My advisors were, one advisor, a guy named Matt Kahn, and Matt Kahn was a genius. He's one of my first mentors, for sure. And then one of his best friends was a guy named David Kelly. And David Kelly is the one that's famous for inventing the mouse. And he owns a company called IDEO. And IDEO is one of the biggest design firms in the world. And he also transformed the way people think about design. Now design and design thinking is much more applicable to mainstream business. It's part of the vernacular, especially in tech, and anything that has to do with people using your product. And so I was very fortunate in the fact that I was being led by Matt Kahn and by association David Kelly, and they allowed me to do what I would call a wanderlust. And I took classes, all kinds of different classes, but I had to tell my advisor why this class is important for my pursuits within design. For example, I took a perception course, which are no joke. It's all about how we perceive. And I had to tell him why I wanted to do that. But it was one of the greatest courses I ever took. And so my point is that now people within the industry know what design thinking is. These were the mavericks. These were the pioneers. And I was blessed enough to be part of that before it was a thing. That's kind of a long roundabout explanation, but it was yet one more thing that fell in my lap that that I'm extremely extremely thankful for. Now I do look back and think, what would have happened if I would have gone in, into design as my profession? Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending upon how you look at it, I had a second mentor named Bud Greenspan, who encouraged me to go into the entertainment business. And so I did. I kind of followed Bud Greenspan's lead. He made the official 1984 film, 16 Days of Glory.
Right. And Bud Greenspan, for anybody who has, in that era, who has watched anything around the Olympics, like he was the guy who created the ethos of the Olympics in so many ways.
Certainly of that era, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that voice, the mythological proportions of the Olympic Games storytelling he was the pioneer of that, truly. And he's looked upon today as one of the great sports filmmakers of all time.
He really was. And
one more blessing that I received, it is all quite perplexing to me, but I have tons of gratitude for all these experiences.
Well, I mean, there are two different things going on, right? I mean, you're talking about those sliding door moments where, the guy next to you might well be the president, or the girl next to you might be the next president of the US, and you don't know that, and look at yourself and those kinds of things. But it's one, having the opportunities, and two, taking advantage of those opportunities, making the most of those opportunities. It's easy to say, well, I was lucky and I got pushed along here, and I'm like, I'm not buying I was completely lucky. You were lucky in parts of it, but seizing that opportunity. My acting coach always used to say that luck is when preparation meets opportunity.
For sure.
And thinking out of the box on the design part, I mean, IDEO is sort of the ultimate thinking out of the box and the ultimate problem solving.
It's a great way to put it. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, well, we have to solve this problem. What's the best way to solve this problem? And it's not necessarily the traditional way that everybody has approached it. As a student, and then you had 2 more years as a competitor, how did that, or you had more years as a competitor, but 2 more years as a collegiate, as an NCAA competitor, how did that did the design major then affect what you were doing as an athlete, how you were approaching your swimming, how you were approaching your training?
I think it was a life philosophy. They were 2 different orbits for me. They were 2 distinctly different orbits for me. However, they were all within the same ball of energy, because I had a finite amount of energy. And I remember those final 2 years in college, waking up multiple days, more days than not, wondering how the heck I'm going to get through this day. Absolutely. I say that that being a student athlete at Stanford was the hardest thing I've ever done. It was really hard. And especially when I decided that I wanted to really excel and apply myself at school. So yeah, it was really hard, very difficult, but it's worthwhile. It's so worthwhile. I'm so glad I did it. I had so many amazing experiences throughout those years.
Interesting. Well, I was also, so I had read or heard some of your training, where at one point you were doing more kind of like reaction based training, like light oriented, and that's where I was thinking there might have been some overlap with the design, but there's not. This was just strictly.
Yeah, they're 2 very different things. I'm sure, my outlook on life has a great deal to do with it, because the design thinking is observing, what people need. For example, somebody who doesn't have the use of their legs, they need a wheelchair. Like there's like lots of different applications. It's like, okay, what's the pain point for the most amount of people, and create a product for them. Where it was kind of inverse of that before David Kelly, where you made a pretty product and hope people bought it because they needed it or wanted it.
right, where you're filling a need.
Yeah.
And you talk about the wheelchair thing, which is interesting because I mean, in some ways, wheelchairs started as like chairs that they put wheels on.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, it's wild to go back. I look at some of like the old Stoke Mandeville. Stoke Mandeville is where the Paralympics started back in 1948, and it was a effectively like a military hospital. And you look at some of these guys who are then starting to play basketball, and it looks like they're getting around in recliners.
Yeah. Right. With wagon wheels.
Which probably doesn't help your basketball game.
No, but it's a perfect example of that, and the specialization for adaptive athletes is a great way to look at that. It's like, how do you make somebody with an amputation, a leg amputation, how do you make them walk as comfortably and in the case of the Paralympics as fast as possible? Well, there's designers that are watching these athletes and studying their movements and like looking at the composite materials and this and that, and they're going back and it's like, this is what the athletes need. And then some smart dude or lady came up with a blade, right? Racing wheelchairs, another great example of that, right? I'm sure there's still all kinds of technological innovations going into adaptive sports, right?
It really is, and to the point where like the German long jumper, amputee long jumper, was jumping at the national championships, and they essentially said, no, we are barring you from the national championships because you're jumping too far.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. I didn't
Yeah.
realize that.
Yeah. No, and so it's interesting how far the design can go. But back to Bud Greenspan.
Yeah, sure.
How did this conversation work where he was encouraging you to go into movies, into the media? How did that happen? What were you even thinking about it? I mean, you were the subject of his movie.
He let me know very early on that he loved my story from a storytelling point of view, from the lens, through the lens looking at the Olympics. And he was rather unabashed. He was like very open and very kind and very gentle, but he was not afraid to heap on praise. And so he always like really enjoyed my story, and we created a bond when I started helping him promote the film. And so I would speak, and the segment is with Rowdy Gaines, who people might know from all of his commentary of the Olympics and in the swimming.
And he was too old, right? I mean, Rowdy was 25 years old. He was too old, but it's catapulted him to a career that's still lasting. So this is some of what you're talking about in terms of that gold medal.
I think that's a good example. Yeah. But on the other hand, from a storytelling point of view, it's like you want the yin and yang, and I'm sure why Bud selected to do parallel stories of Rowdy's journey and my journey.
Mm-hmm.
My journey, wah, wah. And then there's Rowdy's journey, which is da, 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 and but that's life.
Right.
That's life. It's just, and I've, come to realize, like, yeah, bummers happen. Bad things happen. They just happen. And it's sometimes there's not a reason for it. But I'm able to, like, if I wasn't in Bud Greenspan's movie, where would I be, like, without his encouragement? I don't know. There's a million things that go into a life that influence where you end up taking, and sometimes you won't even see it coming, and you will take a turn and it will transform you. And as long as you live, you will have that opportunity that if you make this turn, it might lead you to a place that is amazing.
And this heartbreak that you had was effectively the thing that catapulted you to a new career.
Yeah, I guess that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, for sure. I mean, things hitting the bottom, it really affects you. It really, like, you have to really take account for what you're going to do next. So yeah, that's an interesting way to put it, that if it were not for, like, if I won a gold, I probably wouldn't have been in the movie. There wouldn't have been a yin and yang. I wouldn't have been part of the yin and yang story of Rowdy.
Well, it might have been a different movie, obviously, but yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where it would lead me. But like I said, I'm here I am, getting onto the years, and I've had a great life. So all those lefts and rights that I took have led me to this point that I'm like I said, I'm grateful. And I've been blessed.
You were talking about the promotion of the movie. I've seen those movies like on television. That's where I saw the Bud Greenspan movies. But were
Yeah.
you putting them up in theaters and traveling
Yeah.
around to theaters?
Yeah, they would have different premieres. And I remember the first one was actually a rough cut. And I'm pretty sure it was in San Francisco, and that was the first time I really got to interact with Bud because I was going to college up there, and he asked me to speak. And it's a very raw topic, especially then. It was a very raw topic for me to talk about. So I think
How soon after? How soon after the games is
it's
this?
like within a year, I think.
Okay.
I don't know, a year or so. And so I suspect that Bud reacted to me wearing my heart on my sleeve. Um, and then it was the premiere, the world premiere was in New York City, and it was at is it the Kennedy? Which one's the one? Is it the Kennedy Center, the big one in Manhattan?
The Kennedy Center. I thought the Kennedy Center was in DC.
Is in DC. What's it called?
I'm
It,
trying to
it
think of what that might be.
anyway, it's in this big grand ballroom, and there are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people there. And I'm kind of nervous because I know everybody's going to, after this, everybody's going to know what happened to me. And then Bud comes up to Rowdy and I, who I believe we're talking right there, kind of off to the side. And he said, "Would you mind saying a few words?" I'm like, "Bud, it's like, what? I'm just supposed to say some extemporaneous words? Like, couldn't you have prepared me a little bit? There's 8,000 people out there. It's a world premiere of your film." And I remember Rowdy we both had similar reactions, but Rowdy had already done a substantial amount of public speaking at this
And
point.
this is like the who's who in the audience too, right?
Yeah.
Black tie kind of thing, or
Yeah, I think, I don't know. I don't remember if it was black tie, but I was certainly in a suit. Yeah, it was world premiere. It was, all the athletes were there. Like, it was no holds barred. And I remember just, going up on stage. I don't remember what the heck I said. I do remember thinking to myself, "Oh man, I have to be on the stage with Rowdy, who, as you know, is incredibly charismatic and, just a charming force, and so, yeah, he had me speak at the world premiere."
did you
It
go
was a
before
trip.
or after Rowdy?
I don't remember. I don't remember. I remember being intimidated by Rowdy, though.
Oh, that is awesome. But this is the thing, and obviously you don't remember what you said, but it sounds like there was a great reaction to what you
Yeah,
said.
like I said, I don't remember. I just don't remember. I remember doing it. And I remember thinking to myself, I can't see anything right here. It's like when you were probably, when you were hosting the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Hall of Fame a couple of months ago. I mean, you got up on stage, it's hard to see. You did a great job, by the way. You did an amazing job.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. That was it is. And but it's also the audience can affect the way that you approach it. Speaking to your peers is far more intimidating than speaking to almost any other group.
Oh, you're saying in context of the Hall of Fame?
Well, the Hall of Fame, but I'm also talking in your context as well, because you were speaking effectively to the Olympic community.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is the who's who and people you might not even know who are super powerful or whatever, and so
Yeah, I don't think any of that. I don't remember thinking any of that. It's just all a blur. Look, you know that that competing at the level of the Olympics or Paralympics, it's a blur, and oftentimes these moments of immense gravitas in your life, they're impressionistic. The memories are impressionistic and rather vague, and so that's one of them.
That is definitely one of them. But the reaction, obviously, probably the biggest audience in some ways for you or for the future of your career was Bud.
Yeah, I didn't realize that at the time,
You
but
did,
it's
you had
true.
no idea at the time, but apparently you made an impression on him, which is when you think back on when I think of it, he's one of the ultimate storytellers.
Yeah.
And so to make an impression on one of the ultimate storytellers, how did how did that then lead you to a career in film? Because film's a great place to sort of start at the bottom too, right? I mean, no matter who you are, you know, I mean, if you have your master's in film, unless you've done something that is allowing you to then do the next thing, you're good to get the coffee.
Absolutely. I was sweeping the floors, and yeah, I was up early getting getting the food, delivered and all that. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you definitely start at the bottom, and it's humbling, but it's liberating. Um and the person who hired me, he knew of my background, but I asked him to not publicize it. I was, but people still found out, because I really, really just wanted to make it, just by being the hardworking grunt of a production assistant. And it all led somewhere. It all led to me doing the next steps. And for that, I'm really, really appreciative. And Bud never helped me get a job or anything like that. It wasn't like that. But we remained intact. And whenever I was in New York City, I would go visit him. Often when he was here in Los Angeles, we would go have breakfast. And so we kept in touch up until the end when he started getting sick.
And what a great relationship to have. And I'm sure it is that mentor, almost father figure kind of thing that you're checking in and it's
Yeah.
like, John,
Well,
what are you up to? And
I love stories. I love telling stories. And if you're going to tell stories, you need to have, you know, circular kind of, start where it begins. And this has a nice button in that, when I won my first Emmy, and this was 20 years later or something, 20 something years later. And the next morning, the first call that I made was, I got to the office early because we partied all night, but we still had to be at work the next day. I got to the office early, and he's on the East Coast. So I called him, and I remember very clearly it was important to me that I call Bud. And I remember he said something that I will always remember and always cherish. And that is, he said, well, now, John, we're colleagues.
oh, interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And it's very Bud. He's very regal. So I can actually hear his voice. And to me, that was the ultimate validation.
Do you felt like you were a colleague as well? I mean, he said that, but
He
did
said
you feel
that.
like, okay, yes, Bud, I'm a colleague, or it's like, no, you're still Bud Greenspan?
No, I just wanted him to be proud of me. Yeah.
How did that go from the sweeping the floors, getting the coffee to winning the Emmy? Because is it partially, I mean, when you're in that PA kind of position, is it volunteering for everything? Is it paying attention? How do you move up incrementally? And it's probably different for everybody, but how did you move up incrementally?
Well, I think it always boils down to that you're trying to make your boss's life a little easier. So trying to figure out, okay, I was working directly for the first assistant director who's running the set. He's the one that makes sure that the lighting's all ready to go, that the director is in his trailer waiting, and that the actor is ready to go and out of makeup and wardrobe and all that. Like, he's the one. So I just tried to be super vigilant, and be on the lookout to making sure that I could help him do that job. There was actually a second assistant director who I directly reported to, but yeah, that's how you learn. In fact, I learned that early on. There was a guy named, Greg Winchell, who was a great breaststroker, who would have perhaps been the great, one of the greatest breaststrokers in American history, a la Steve Lundquist. In fact, he was a competitor of Steve Lundquist, and I got to train with him. And he had just come back from the 1979 Pan American Games, where he got second to Steve Lundquist. But when I was training with him, I would watch his stroke underwater because I wanted to see what he did. And at first it made him really mad. But then, like he said, I was the little squirt and like, what the hell am I doing looking at him underwater?
So how are you looking at him underwater? What were you doing?
Going underwater and putting my goggles and looking up and watching him swim by.
Really? So he's swimming over the top of you,
that.
kind of thing.
I did that all the time. Yeah. It's important. It's important. And I wanted to try to be like him, right? Emulate. And he ended up being fine with it because he took it as a compliment that I respected his ability, that I wanted to be like him. And so unfortunately he was killed. He was killed in a motorcycle accident, like the day after he got back from I think it was the day I remember it was the same day that he came to the pool showing his Pan American Games silver medal. And it was that day he was killed. So, it's again, it's like, would I have had two Steve Lundquists to contend with if Greg had survived? Very well so. Very well, big possibility. You just never know. But anyway, the observation. So yes, observing.
The observing, and the way that you could best help the first assistant director and the second assistant director was by knowing their job enough to be able to anticipate.
Well, of course, you don't know their job when you first
start. But you're
start,
trying to figure it out, right?
But yes, I mean, it goes back to you're questioning about design thinking, and the essence of design thinking is observation. Like you see a person walking down the street with a paper bag, and holding their possessions. And it's easy to say, well, it shouldn't be a paper bag. He needs to have a bag, a regular bag to hold his stuff in. And I think perhaps I was informed by my encouragement academically that observation is the key. And I think that was just maybe it's innate in me to try to observe and learn, but it's also probably what helped me through my career.
This perception course.
Part of it, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all in part and parcel. It all contributes, right?
It is interesting. So where do you have your big breakthrough moment? I mean, certainly we made it to the Emmy, but where do you kind of think, okay, I'm making it in this industry. I'm not just disposable, because that's an industry where it can be really easy to feel disposable, right?
Yeah, I worked really hard, and I kept getting hired. I just kept getting hired and kept getting opportunities. And when those opportunities came, even though my first time I had a chance at writing, it's like, I'm not a writer. That's the last thing I wanted to do when I was I just didn't ever aspire to be a writer, but yet I got an opportunity. And so I did it, and they liked it, and they kept hiring me. That's the way everything is, right? And just a quick comment on the Emmy, on the Emmys is of course, if you're in the television business like I am, that's the pinnacle. That's what you're trying to do. That would be your a dream come true. And it was, but it's also lightning in a bottle. Like so many things have to contribute to me having been on The Amazing Race on those early years. Right. And yes, I saw early, the first season of The Amazing Race, and I'm like, I want to do that show. And I figured out who I knew there, and I started bugging them. And I eventually got hired. And that's what led, you don't see any of that while you're doing it. You just keep going on to the next thing. And I was just really, really fortunate. I think just like winning a Paralympic or Olympic gold medal, you were just fortunate that you were ready that day and that everything went well. There's so much good fortune that has to go in to having a moment like that.
I'm with you. I often say it's a lifetime of work for the hope of a moment of brilliance.
That's a great way to put it.
At the right time.
Yeah.
and because that moment of brilliance can come at the wrong time too. You're like, well, it was beautiful day of training. Well done. Like,
Yeah.
good. It's not quite at the right time. What, looking back on your career, because you said you're a happy guy,
Yeah, for the
and
most
looking
part.
back on your career as a swimmer in television, now doing a podcast, being a husband, being a father, I didn't even ask if your kids are swimmers.
No, they hated swimming. They thought it was ridiculously stupid. And my wife was a swimmer. She
Right.
swam at Stanford, and both of our children had beautiful strokes, absolutely beautiful strokes, but they hated swimming. So our son was a very fast runner, and he ran track in high school. He was a sprinter, but he unfortunately tore a hamstring his junior year and just never he never was able to bounce back from that. Our daughter played volleyball, and she actually played volleyball in college, and they both just graduated this past year. So yeah, I guess there's some athletic genes going on in there someplace. With that said, there's not many athletes, if any at all. I guess my dad played football in high school and did a little swimming, but for the most part, you look back at my family, and on both sides, there's no athletes. But you need the perspective that World War II, like, you didn't have necessarily the luxury of being an athlete when you were, going through the Depression and then ultimately having to deal with World War II. So that's a contributing factor, obviously.
What's the message? So you didn't pass on swimming, because yes, there has to be swimming DNA that you and your wife passed to your kids. But what's the message that you pass to your kids with regard to, I mean, it's really probably more of a life message than it is necessarily a sports message. Is there anything from your experience that you look at and say, this is the thing that I wish that I had known kind of as I was starting?
I think perhaps, first of all, my wife and I realized that our success in athletics cast a large shadow, excuse me, on them. And we did everything that we could possibly do not to have that shadow eclipse their feelings toward athletics. So that was, like, at least in my mind, that was really in the front. Um, but on the other hand, I think that we were, because, as life is filled with heartbreaks, and athletics is kind of a microcosm of life. And man, oh man, there's some Lulus that happen if you aspire to do big things. It's just the way it is. You push all your push all your money on one bet. Well, when you lose, it really hurts. And that's kind of the pursuit of athletics. You're putting your chips down on the table, and you lose. And so I think perhaps maybe we had some understanding with regard to the kids, and possibly helping them navigate their way out to the other side.
That it's not quite as crushing potentially if you push all your chips in and it doesn't work. Because I mean, you had to experience that being so young, right? I mean, 20 years old, you had somebody at 11 years old say, hey, you could be good at this.
Yeah.
So 9 years of 20 years, almost 50% of your life.
Yeah.
And, granted, there are probably some parts, 4 or 5, whatever, you might not remember a ton from those years. So from your conscious memory, it can be really damaging, can it? I mean, this
Oh,
sense of like, this is who I was and who I thought I was for as long as I can remember thinking about who I am.
well, as positive as I try to remain, it also there's there's an ugly side. There's an ugly side that athletes experience when they retire, after they retire from being an athlete. And there's many different reasons for this, and some people deal with it better than ours. Like I said earlier, my way of dealing with it was turning my back on that guy that was the swimmer boy, and trying to be something else. But I think it's, in many cases, it's even more difficult for people who have had resounding, earth-shattering, world-famous results. Michael Phelps comes to mind. There's a number of really big athletes, and the reason Michael Phelps comes to mind is because he produced a documentary for HBO called The Weight of Gold, which I'm sure you've seen. But, and I say this again and again, but it is it's what athletes talk about. Like when you really get candid and when there's not a recording device and you start getting to know each other, you talk about some of those lasting scars that are inevitable through the pursuit of trying to do something that's that big. And it's just like, the odds are so against you, but you still try. It creates scars. There's a lot of resistance. It's constant resistance.
It's constant resistance, and that's part of the attraction too, how much the odds are against you as well, right?
Yes. I mean, I think whatever happened, where I just had this DNA makeup where I had a fire in my belly that was quenched by my athletic career. It made me feel better. And so I wanted to see how far I could take it. Because it was therapeutic. It's still therapeutic. I swam in the ocean today because it's meditative. I happen to know you do a lot of working out. In fact, the first time we ever spoke was when you heard me talk on the Rich Roll podcast, and you were doing your bike, right?
Yeah.
Your stationary bike.
Yeah, it was training.
Yeah.
Luckily, you and Rich had a really long conversation. You got me through, I think, like a 3-hour workout that day. It was great.
Between the two of us, I think we could be a little bit long-winded, but yeah, Rich, wow, what he's been able to do as well. Like his story is just, he's done amazing things, and I'm very proud of him. And
it is amazing, and he's been a great voice and opened so many eyes. Is that part of the reason for you, this transition from sport into life, like the sport life balance? Is that why you went into your podcast? Or these the conversations that you have with athletes and in the quiet moment that really are the transparent moments?
it's a lot of things. A lot of them was circumstance as well. It just so happened that I was really trying to figure out a way out of the entertainment business at about the same time COVID hit.
Mm-hmm.
And I had some projects, but they basically, everything kind of died during COVID. And it sounds crass, but a lot of projects just suddenly disappeared. But I still wanted to tell stories. And I admired Rich for what he would have been able to do. And there's a part of me that wants to tell the story of athletes. I love athletes, and I think that they're a great example to help anyone sort of like wade their way through life. So that was kind of the impetus. And then I was, during COVID, I'm like, I've got to do something. I'm going to go crazy. And I started the podcast then. It was in, I think, November of 2020. So it was a year and a half ago or so. And yeah, so that was, had COVID not happened, would I have started the podcast? I don't know. It's like so much in life, right? Like, would I be in entertainment business if Bud Greenspan hadn't have taken me under his wing? But that's as a result of me not winning a gold medal. It's all like, it's life. It's life. And it plays out. And you don't necessarily see where it's going.
Exactly. And the question with the podcast is, I mean, you've been through so much in your career. I mean, through the swimming, through the entertainment, through the academic side of things. Do you continue to learn? Is that the objective for you in having a conversation in the podcast, that you continue to learn about yourself as well?
It's always, it's like I love to learn. I love to learn. It's just part of me. And so absolutely, that's a major part of why I do it. And it also boils down to, what I said earlier, which is when athletes get together and talk, when we're all together, we talk about some stuff. And if there could be a fly on the wall, I think that there's informative and interesting and entertaining material that comes from those types of conversations. So what I'm trying to do with the podcast is to create kind of a fly on the wall scenario for the listeners, so that they feel as though they're privy to thoughts that are not necessarily accessible to them throughout the regular course of their day. And that's what I hope I'm doing. And clearly this is what you're doing as well. So,
well, it's the intention is to effectively get those conversations that are beyond the velvet ropes kind of thing, right? Yeah, you've made your way into the locker room. You're not just on the pool deck. You're into where the real conversations happen. And to me, that's the essence. I mean, you and I are both sports people at heart, and I feel like there's an essential part of sport. That sport is, I often say, it's my greatest teacher, right? And it's because I've had to struggle along the
sure,
way,
sure.
and because I've wanted to struggle and go, okay, well, I'm learning something from that struggle. And this is the message that you're talking about, is that, yeah, as a result of those struggles, as a result of getting closer and closer to the top of the pyramid, when everybody has the same preparation, and what's going to then be the differentiator?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's when it gets to the cool part, right?
That's totally when it gets to the cool part. And I think one of the reasons that athletes, no matter what their backgrounds, you're younger than me, you're in different sports than me, you're Paralympian, I'm an Olympian, we're eras apart, but you and I are a perfect example that when we got together, when we talked on the phone for the first time, we hit it off immediately. And it's the shared experience that you have with people who have been through it that is invigorating, and it's nourishing your soul, because we don't get to talk about those things with somebody who truly at the core understands, because very few people have been through it.
Few people have been through it, but it also works on a universal level as well, right? So it's representative of that human journey,
Yeah,
that we're all going through, this idea of taking a risk. They're saying, yeah, I'm going to try that. I'm going to try to see how good I can possibly be. This is what you said. That's a big statement, to figure out how good I could possibly be. Like, okay, do you really want to know? Because if you want to know, there are going to be these milestones along the way, and some of them are going to be really difficult.
yeah. And look, you're shooting for the stars, and if you miss, it's a hard landing. It's just the way it is. You understand, every athlete that aspires to get to that level understands that equation fully, completely, in their heart, in their bones. They understand that equation, and they still go and they still do it.
They still go and they still do it.
It takes a certain type of person, I think, in order to really put themselves on the line like that.
To put themselves on the line like that. But then what I'm also taking from you is yes, you shoot for the moon, and the landing can be really hard, but then you're also willing to go and do it again in a different arena.
Yeah, I think I've often said, I usually use it to refer to swimmers, that to be a good swimmer, you have to have a screw loose. And there's an element to that I think is true, that you have to just truly, your brain has to function in a way that a vast majority of people's doesn't.
Right. That is crazy to a certain extent.
Well, what you're doing is like, if I was to say to my grandfather when I was 14 or 15 years old, when I really thought that I could make an Olympic team, that I want to go to the Olympics, he would have rolled his eyes and said, good luck. Okay.
Make sure you have a backup plan.
Yes. Are you going to, yes, become a banker? Be sure to become a, yeah. No, but it's like, he was wired differently. He didn't understand. Like, can't expect somebody to understand it necessarily, but he didn't understand it.
No, but I think that is the part of the joy that we as athletes, and hopefully a lot of other people experience as well, is this sense. And because it doesn't have to be in sport, it doesn't have to be at the very pinnacle of whatever you do.
It's transferable.
But it's transferable, and it's the curiosity that you were talking about, that desire to figure out how good I could really be.
Yeah, and I think that, yeah. I remember it was my advisor, Matt Kahn, who, I remember I had to, there were certain assignments and certain projects that would be impacted by competition, et cetera. And he said something to the effect of, I will always give you the benefit of the doubt because you go through life in a wanderlust. And it was that the reason that's really the first time I heard the term wanderlust in a sentence. And that was kind of like one of those moments, like that coach that said, "Hey, you have talent," when I was 11 years old. That was kind of like, "Oh, I've got wanderlust." And I think there's just part of my, that DNA thing that you were talking about. I'm just blessed with a lot of wanderlust, and I enjoy it.
Exactly. And somebody had the ability to actually name it for you, because you
Oh,
might not have necessarily recognized it.
No, he was a genius. He was awesome.
That is awesome. Well, John, thanks so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to get a chance to talk to you. And I love hearing your story. I mean, I look at so much of what you've done and think it is just so cool. So,
well, likewise. I mean, you too. I mean, come on, you're amazing with your commentary and hosting and Hall of Fame, and it's just yeah. So kudos back.
Thank you. Well, I am glad that we get to share what we've done with the next generation, or with the current generation, and with the general public, really. I mean, that to me is an amazing opportunity, amazing gift that we get to be able to share it.
Yeah, thanks for being part of that. Something I obviously feel quite strongly about. So.
Yes, exactly. Well, keep doing what you're doing. So thanks again. And thank you to all of you for tuning in. I hope you've had a great time. I hope you've enjoyed our discussion. The greatest gift you can give us is to tell your friends to tune in, tell your friends that we'll have another great guest next week. And please like us, please follow us, and we will do our best to give you the most amazing content that we can. Thanks so much. Thank you for joining us. Please subscribe to Chris Waddell Living It for more stories on the adaptive community, the Paralympics, artists, athletes, entrepreneurs, experts in the experience of being human. Also follow us on Spotify, Apple, Facebook, and Instagram. I look forward to seeing you next week.